what are you giving people that's different? People, I mean, you see, like you see a lot of, for example, beauty brands that they'll do a photo shoot with a model and they're posting, she's got beautiful skin, or product smeared on her face, and there's photos of bottles and whatever, but how many pages are there out there like that? So what is your page offering people that's different? And I think with me, one, it's solving a need. They want to buy dresses that make them feel amazing and they know I'm giving it to them. Two, I've just lost my train of thought. So they're connecting with me personally. And I think, again, it goes back to that why. They want to connect with the person. They want to connect with the journey. So that, I think, is a killer combination. And then I think the other thing is as well, understanding and really looking at, like I just drew on that example of like beauty pages, right? They're great, stunning images, really professional, but why aren't people engaging in them? And if they're not engaging in that, then what are the sorts of images that people are engaging with? I do that all the time. And I look at other brands, other influencers, and I look at the things that have the most interaction, and the little sort of tips and tricks that people use to engage people. So like one of them recently for me is, and this went viral. So I posted 5 outfits. So it was a carousel post and I was like 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, like which look is your fave? I got 1 million impressions on it.
Wow.
24,000 likes, 11,000 saves, 200 and something comments. People love that kind of stuff.
You're obviously a very creative person, and I would actually say I'm the opposite. I'm very analytical. And
you're like my partner. I think you're one side or the other.
Yeah, 100%. But I think it's a really, like, I can understand that. You know what I mean? So for people out there that maybe are struggling with social media, I think the idea of creating a personality for your brand, and then looking at research, like we're a content business now, so I think I'm getting a little bit better. I'm nowhere near these guys, but I think the idea of like looking what is actually working, and you'd be amazed at like what can happen if you just go and look at what's actually working and then try to give your own spin on it.
I mean, the examples are all there. You've just got to do your research. And I think even for us, like with Base, obviously Base isn't my personal identity. It's a separate entity. And there was a bit of trial and error there of, what sort of images interact, what do people interact with most, what's getting the most likes, and then you test and you see and you go, okay, that worked really well. We need to do more of that.
That's literally social media 101. And I think that's the biggest thing that holds people back.
Yeah.
Like not putting stuff out. You need like so much feedback. Yeah. You need to be posting so much just so that you can see, okay, well, this worked, that didn't work. And then you can kind of, you really do pick up how quick it can happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do you get a clothing business off the ground? Like, what is the actual process involved with that? Because I found, we've talked about a lot of your journey and so on, but I think the nitty gritty is the interesting part for the listeners and for me at home is like, and my belief is that everybody looks at business in a unique way. There's these kind of overarching principles that exist of how you do it, and obviously in different industries as well. But in your view, like, how do you make it work? Like, how do you get it off the ground? Is it social? You're obviously social media.
That is extremely important. Yep. So that's one factor, and then you've got the other factor of manufacturing garments, and I guess for anyone who's studied, they've got an understanding of how to construct a garment, how to create patterns, and then I guess you send off your garment overseas or you give them to a local manufacturer with their patterns. It's local manufacturing and overseas manufacturing is two completely different processes. So for Base Brand, we create tech packs and we send those off. They've got their specs and they go off their specs. For us here, we create a pattern. We grade that pattern. We invested a year or so ago in a Gerber machine, so that does the plotting of the pattern.
Oh, yeah.
We've got a cutter who comes in, we lay the fabric, he cuts it, and then we give it to our manufacturers that are local.
So you're doing that here?
Yeah, here in Australia.
Okay, so you're doing that here and then sending it off rather than relying on, say, the manufacturer to come back, and it's almost like instead of sampling.
Well, you've got it's more of a like it's a more hands-on approach. So my pattern maker will make a sample, we'll fit it back and forth, sometimes maybe 4 or 5 times till we're happy with the fit. Then she creates the pattern, grades the pattern, plots it. We lay the fabric, it gets cut, it gets given to the manufacturer, they make one, we approve it, or we send it back and we say change this, or you got to do this or that, whatever. And then it comes, the production comes to us and we ship it out. So, and then, you got Shopify, you got all of that. So, I mean, it's a huge process. And if you don't love it, don't do it. What
about like logistically, right? So I know that like in the early days, getting something off the ground like that, it's not like you can just go out and get so much quantity, and you kind of do have to manage cash flow, and you have to manage production and the kind of logistical side of it.
Yeah.
What are the biggest kind of lessons that you've learned along the journey, or your guiding principles of like, okay, from the very beginning onwards, you kind of, without obviously, it doesn't have to be super detailed, but like how do you logistically get something like this off the ground flowing through that?
I think you've got to mitigate your risks. And when you're making clothes, I mean, ultimately the consumer has to buy it. So you're not in control in that regard. But what you can control is your expenses. So local production requires smaller minimums. So you can produce a run of, 20. See how that garment goes. If it sells out, you just say, guys, sold out, you reproduce it. You know what I mean? And that way, you're not making like 100, 200 garments that you're going to be stuck with. And you've got to outline all of your costs and make sure you're really clear with everyone that you're dealing with, from your pattern maker to your manufacturers. Do all your costings. And I think, for me, I'm not a numbers person by nature, so spreadsheets really help, and that can help you manage your cash flow. And I think you've got to always consider, what is the worst case scenario? What if I only sell this amount? What if I don't sell any at all? And not putting yourself in a position where, you can topple over. And that is what happened with Zachary in the end. Was we opened all these stores, and there wasn't enough money to fund enough stock for all those stores. So we were taking the same amount of stock that we had for 2 stores across 6 stores. So essentially we're spreading our profits and we're bumping up our overheads. And to me, I don't know, that was just, business 101. But these are the lessons that you learn. Mitigating your risk is the biggest thing to consider when you're starting out in particular, but always through our business.
And that's really interesting. So you've obviously got a lot of experience in kind of growing a business at all different phases. So what about when when we move beyond just starting up and we kind of get to that point where it's like, because I feel like there would be a crossroads, right? There's kind of like that in-between bit, and maybe that's where you guys got stuck with Zachary, and so you going through that again, like, what does that crossroads kind of look and feel like, and then how do you navigate through that? Well, more importantly, like, what have you done differently, and what's been the difference?
Well, my one thing was bricks and mortar is so risky in Australia, and it was not a road I ever wanted to go down, because you're relying on foot traffic, you're relying on staff, you've got shop fit outs, you've got rent, you got all of that kind of stuff. So I was like, great, we're never doing that again, because the money that I would spend on that, I can take that and put that into digital marketing, and that's going to give me like a return of tenfold. So it didn't make sense to me to ever go down that road again, and I wouldn't. And I think for us, we came to a sort of crossroads where, the business started to really take off and things were selling out really quickly. And then we needed to do a next production run. And we were like, okay, if we keep the numbers the same, then we're going to have the same result. We're going to be selling out and we're not going to grow. So you've got to invest to grow. So we took a punt, we upped our stock levels, and it paid off. And from there we grew more and more and more. So that was, for me, what made sense.
I think it's really interesting, and I'd also love to get a gauge of like what's actually changing in the market that you're noticing, because obviously COVID would have been a whirlwind, and it was a very different time, and obviously e-commerce would have there was a big online
Huge.
was huge.
Huge.
What's the consensus kind of coming out of COVID, and are you noticing any changes? What's your thoughts on the kind of...
Look, I think the thing is what I've personally experienced, and I don't know if it's just my brands, but people are buying and they're spending more than ever. The space where I can say I have seen the most change is in social media. The algorithms changed. It's a lot more difficult to, get out there the way you used to. People aren't following as much. The algorithm pushes you down. If people aren't interacting in your posts in the first couple of seconds, you get dropped down more and more. It's not as organic as it used to be. So I think definitely investing your money in different avenues online is really important now as things have changed. And also influencers. Like, we used to have a much stronger response with influencer placements that we're not having anymore because of those changes in the algorithms. So we've had to shift and pivot our strategy. Like, for example, we would give to influencers that had hundreds of thousands of followers, because when it was more organic, we were reaching such a big audience.
Yeah.
Where now we're finding micro influencers are having a much bigger impact and much bigger interaction than, your influencers that have hundreds of thousands of followers, which is, really interesting. And that's sort of come as we've come out of COVID.